It is early, and I want to drink my caffeine drink and garden a little bit before I go to the gym. So let's talk about Merchant of Venice while I do that. Imagine an essay, if you will, entitled "Sometimes Being White and Gay Makes You Evil," an exploration of Antonio and Bassanio in Merchant of Venice, because that's it. Which, by the way, because there's new people here, let me be extremely clear. When an academic scholar, particularly a literary academic scholar, is presenting you with their interpretation of something, it is their interpretation of something. That person is probably more educated than you if you're not also a scholar, and so therefore they have more evidence backing up whatever they're saying. But that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to disagree with me. You're certainly allowed to disagree with me. I'm just gonna come with a list of why I believe what I believe. So you come too with the list of why you believe what you believe. That's what academic debate is. Okay, so I've talked about race in Shakespeare's time before, and how like whiteness as we think of it today hadn't fully solidified as a concept yet during Shakespeare's time period. That doesn't mean there weren't white people. Whiteness was created in opposition to blackness, particularly during like the form of whiteness that we think of today. The way that they perceived whiteness was slightly different than we think of it today. The form that we think of whiteness in today was particularly derived in opposition to blackness in order to justify chattel slavery into the United States of America. That was still developing over Shakespeare's lifetime. I am saying this because Merchant of Venice is a race play in the same way that Othello is. One of the things about the context of the word Moor, which is what Othello is described as, is that it also came with a heavy implication, and not always like quite literally, because people would throw that word around at a different people, but from the way that Othello is called the Moor of Venice in the play, which, by the way, both Venice, the implication here is that we are to take that title literally, which implies that he would have been North African Muslim. That's probably what he specifically is. Which means that the things that Shylock and Othello have in common are not only that they would have been seen as being of different races than, you know, white people, white English Protestant people, but also different religions, and that's important. Kaylee, I thought this video was supposed to be about gay people. Why is it about race? I'm getting there. Okay. Shakespeare is one generation out from what? The Reformation in England. Henry VIII decided that he didn't want to listen to the Pope because he wanted a divorce, and so he declared himself the head of his own church, and the entire nation turns Protestant. And then Mary comes to the throne, and she starts killing people who aren't Catholic, and then Elizabeth comes to the throne, and then she starts killing people who are Catholic. So when Shakespeare's writing, everybody's Protestant, because Elizabeth has a spy network to get Catholics. So everybody is Protestant. But also, we have no idea who's going to succeed Elizabeth. And for a little bit after Elizabeth dies, it is weird, and people are not sure whether the country is going to be Protestant or Catholic, and people are desperately trying to keep it Protestant. And then once James comes to the throne, we're like, okay. London is also, at that time period, one of the most diverse cities on the face of the planet. Native Americans were being brought over to England, mostly by force, but there were people from almost every continent in London at that point in time. Anyway, both of those plays are about crises around identity and faith. And both of those plays take a character who would normally be demonized or villainized for that difference and complicate them. Okay, pin in that, Antonio and Bassanio. Okay, what happens in the play? Antonio is so sad, and none of his friends can help him figure out why he's so sad. And then Bassanio comes in, and he's like, hey, so I don't have any money, and I have an idea. I'm gonna marry this girl, and she's so cool, and I like her so much, and I'm gonna marry her. Can you lend me money so I can go woo her? And Antonio's like, I don't have any money, because all of my money is with these ships that are overseas. Like, they're coming back, and they're gonna come back with all of this wealth and stuff for me. But I don't have it right now, and I already borrowed a lot of money to get that stuff. And Bassanio's like, please though, please though. And Antonio's like, yeah, okay, I'll figure it out. So he goes to Shylock, who is the Jewish moneylender, who, by the way, at this point in time, like, Christians are not allowed to lend money. That is the reason that Jewish people are moneylenders. They are actually a vital role in society that Christian people literally cannot fill, and they cannot occupy, and they are demonized for it. And Shylock tells Antonio, he gives the audience all of these examples of times that Antonio has been extremely violently racist towards him, including spitting on him in the street. Now, this is where that pound of flesh thing comes in, okay? Is because Shylock says, fine, I will lend you the money, even though you have been violently racist to me, and you still haven't paid me back for all of the other loans that you already took out. And fine, as a joke, okay? You give me a pound of flesh if you can't pay me back, okay? All right. The plots, Bassanio goes off, he woos Portia, right? And what ends up happening is Shylock's daughter she elopes and converts. which, like, breaks him. And then when Antonio can't repay his debts, Shylock says, well, fuck you, I'm taking a pound of your flesh then. Whatever. There's a whole legal case. Antonio writes Bassanio, and that's a whole thing. Portia dresses up as a lawyer and does a little girl boss moment where it's just fucking gross. Check out Riley Lungthief if you want to hear about Portia white girl bossing. Bassanio and Portia are fine. They get married. Antonio's ships actually miraculously come back and they haven't sunk after all, and he has his money back. And Shylock is forced to convert to Christianity. Now, the crux of this is kind of, I think, on Antonio's character. If you're reading him as queer from the outset, first of all, you'd be reading him as queer under the, because we're historical lens, right? And we're also thinking about him as a man who has sodomite desires, right? He wouldn't have identified himself as a gay man. He would have been struggling with sinful thoughts. And he's telling the audience from the outset, like, I am so sad. I am struggling so hard. I'm so sad. Bassanio comes in and immediately says, I'm getting married. Narratively, structurally, the reading makes sense there, right? It's either Royal Shakespeare or National Theatre, and I cannot remember off the top of my head, and I don't want to pause to Google, and I've been, gardening between clips. But there's a production where they kiss. Okay, now imagine you're that gay man, right, who's struggling with what you just think are sinful thoughts, right? So it would be, say it's the equivalent of someone who, like, cannot stop thinking about stealing something. Like, I cannot stop thinking about taking things. And then you're, like, deeply Catholic. Like, think about how that would affect you. That would kind of be where Antonio's mindset might be, except for, like, about, kissing and having sex with his best friend. Okay, so imagine you're in, like, that mindset, too, as Antonio. Whether anything has happened between him and Bassanio, like, you're in that mindset of, like, I'm either doing this thing or I'm thinking about compulsively this thing that I know is a sin and I shouldn't be thinking about and I shouldn't be doing and might send me to hell, like, just for thinking it. And then think about, like, white gay Republicans and how they take out that, like, hatred for themselves on everybody else. There is no love interest for Antonio. He ends that play alone. And the way he speaks to Bassanio, too, is just, ooh! I said this in the video about Hamlet and Horatio, but it's, for the characters in Shakespeare, it's plot and language, right? That whole first scene where they're talking to each other, Bassanio's talking about, like, to you I owe the most in money and in love, and Antonio talks about, like, his love as, like, a monetary, there's also, remember also that during the Renaissance, they're trying to, like, connect back to antiquity, right? Which to artists in the Renaissance also meant looking back at that, like, older, younger, queer male dynamic thing. Hey, queer people have actually always been here and always been looking at the history of other queer people too, by the way. The study of queer history is absolutely not a new concept whatsoever at all. The difference is public funding. Anyway, there's something that happens specifically when there are people who are one little tier away from the upper echelon of privilege. So, this is people specifically like white cisgender heterosexual women, or people like white cisgender gay men, where you are so close to the epitome. And Antonio wouldn't have conceptualized that as something about himself he couldn't change. He would have conceptualized that about himself as something that was wrong with him, that that was a sin that he couldn't stop committing. And the vitriol that we see towards Shylock, and that Shylock describes to us as coming from Antonio, I see that from white gay men within their own community. Basically, some people's internalized homophobia is so bad, they get extra racist about it. And I think that is what is going on with Antonio from Merchant of Venice. Your queerness should make you look in the mirror and go, oh, I need to stand up for other marginalized groups of people. That's what your queerness should do. It, like, actively takes more effort to hate yourself into hating other people more than it takes to just love other people. Like, it actually takes a lot of effort to do that. But I do think it's something that the queer community needs to reflect on. White queer community, obviously. Which is why I think it is interesting when it's done with Antonio from Merchant of Venice. Anyway, if you learned something today, my tip jar is in my bio. Love you guys. I'm gardened enough to go to the gym now. We can totally lift weights.